Hello ladies and gentlemen. In this video we're going to create a complete CRUD application. That's CRUD, which stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete, which are the classic operations that you'd like to perform on data in a database. So this is going to be a CRUD application using the Plasma framework, and the application I'd like to make is a family history editor tool. And this is going to demonstrate how you can create and update and delete data to the FHIR server in addition to reading from it. And I'm going to limit this to 1 hour. I've got my stopwatch running now, so I'll do as much as I can in an hour. This is a live coding video, and we should be able to get most of it done in an hour. If there's any, if we run out of time, I'll probably just polish it up a little bit afterwards, and then I'll post it to the GitHub for reference if anyone wants to take a look at it. So to start off with, we're going to use create plasma app, and we're going to call this FamHX editor. This is going to be a provider application because we are editing patient data, which is something that a provider would normally be doing. It's going to be a web app, and we're going to start off with a template. And while this is loading, I'm going to mention that throughout this development, we'll probably need to use the Plasma documentation. So I'm going to come over here to plasmafhir.com, and that's FHIR, and I'm going to click the link on Docs. And over here we have documentation for the various packages. We're going to be using mostly the Plasma FHIR API, and here are instructions and examples for how to read and write data. Excuse me. So to create a new resource, for instance, we just call plasma.createResource. So we will be referencing this quite a bit. And the other page that will come in handy is the resources page. And the Plasma framework has utility methods for several FHIR resources, and they all are documented here. So for instance, if we want to work with an age, we may end up using this helper method, age.fromYears. Or say maybe we want to convert a range to a string. Well, the Plasma framework comes with a toString method for us to use. Okay, so the sample application has installed, so I'm going to open that up in VS Code. And before I write any code, I'm going to just try to launch it, make sure that it works as is, before I make any changes to it. So I'll go to the README with instructions on how to launch it. And here we have it. One moment. Let me resize the windows, and I will get everything the way I like to have it. Okay, so here is the Plasma portal, and I'll mention that we're going to use the Smart Health IT sandbox during our development because it doesn't require authentication, and it does allow us, I've already tested this a little bit ahead of time, it does allow us to write data back to the server and update resources and create resources and things like that, which the Epic sandbox, I'm not sure, but I don't believe it allows us to do that. All right, so I'll place this over here, and once we click on it, we will be directed to Gerardo Botello's chart. He is a hard-coded patient. It's a made-up patient. He's hard-coded into those auth parameters, and that's the patient that we'll be working on throughout the creation of this app. We'll be working on Gerardo's chart. Alrighty, so the first thing I want to do is clean this up a little bit. So this is all happening in the test screen of the template. And I'm just going to do all my development straight off of the test screen. And then towards the end, maybe I'll rename this to family history screen or something like that. But for now, it's convenient to use the test screen to do the development because it's the first page that we load when we refresh the app. Alrighty. So I don't want to see this line about vitals. I really don't care about his address, so I'll show you how to remove the address. This is actually using the patient header component, which is part of the Plasma FHIR React Components package. And every piece of these components has a unique CSS class name. So I'll take a look at that right here. One moment. So here's the address, and I want to find the class name of that address. It's patient header underscore address. So I'm going to make a copy of that. And since I don't want it to be displayed, I'll go into my app.scss, and I'll say for this CSS class, I want display none. Oh, actually, that may have not been the correct one. Oh, I also don't want to see the address view container. All right, perfect. So we've got Gerardo, and let's say if we didn't want to see his ID either, which I don't really care about, I'll go ahead and hide that as well. I think. Interesting. Oh, I was already formatting it down here. I guess that's why it didn't get hidden. Okay, great. So now I can see Gerardo's name, his sex, age, and date of birth. Okay, so just as a quick test, let's actually try to read Gerardo's family history and see if he has any family history already. The template comes with an example for how to load vitals. So instead of loading the vitals, let's actually load the family history. That's as simple as calling plasma.read family history. And the type now is going to be a family member history. And we'll say it's famhx. Refresh this, and let's take a look at the console here. Oops. Okay, so Gerardo has 3 family members, and actually I'll have to admit that I did some testing earlier today and I added those 3 family members myself. I believe these patients get refreshed maybe once a day or something like that. I'm not quite sure how often, but a few minutes ago there was no family history on Gerardo and I added some myself. So that's where those 3 family members are coming from. Okay. Now, I'll do a little bit of cleanup here. The template gives us access to the Plasma FHIR API, but it's only within this function. So I do want to create a state variable for me to store the Plasma API. So I'm going to say Plasma and set Plasma equals useState, and the type is Plasma FHIR API or undefined, and we'll initialize it as undefined. But then as soon as we create it, we will set Plasma to that. This will give us access to the Plasma FHIR API in other areas of the code in this file. And I'm thinking that while we're at it, we may want to store the patient's ID, although we are already storing patient data, so maybe we don't need it. Okay, so this is looking good. We've already taken care of the R part of our CRUD app, which is reading data. And now the trickier parts are creating, updating, and deleting it. So to help with visualizing the family history, I want to use a UI library that's going to help us out quite a bit. So the library I want to use is called React Table. It's just a way for you to create tables in React fairly easily. And I'm actually not familiar with the documentation. I believe there's a new version since I last used it, and the documentation is quite a bit different. So I really am kind of doing this as I go. So I'm going to get the instructions for how to install it. Stop the application and quickly install React Table. All right, and let me rerun the application. And I think since we've already got 3 family members, I'm going to go ahead and display them automatically in a table. What I had originally intended on doing was creating a function that creates a test family for us so that when we first launched the app, we could click a button and it would generate a bunch of family members by default for us. We will do that at some point, but to start off with, let's throw a table up on here because I think that's going to be a little tricky since I haven't used this version of React Table before. And then we'll start visualizing the family members, and then we'll have something to look at, and we can continue working on it from there. Alrighty, so let's see if they just have an example of how to use it. So let's start with the basic example. And I remember the last time I used React Table, the documentation I thought was not the easiest to read, but that may have changed. Okay, so this reminds me that we need to think about what kind of data we want to show in our table. And I've already opened up the Family Member History FHIR resource, so we can take a look at some of the properties on a Family Member History resource. So we've got the name of the family member, that's probably important. The relationship, this is the relationship from the of the relative to the patient. So for example, if this is the patient's father, then the relationship should be father. And they actually give us a list of family member relationships to work with, and the Plasma FHIR framework has that already coded in and type safe. So we can check the types on that when we get to that point. Another thing to notice, if you are not aware of this, is the cardinality. This tells us, as it says, the minimum and maximum number of times this element can appear in the instance. So a lot of these are 0 to 1. That means that it's basically they're optional properties. It could have a date, it could have one date, or it could not have a date. But the ones that are 1 to 1, these are required properties. So in this case, relationship is a required property of a family member history instance. So I think that will be important for us because it means that we shouldn't attempt to create a family member history instance without setting a relationship. Of course, without setting a reference to the patient itself, because otherwise there's no way to link that instance to the patient. And we even need a status, which is partial, completed, entered in error, or health unknown. So that's kind of interesting. So I think for our table, maybe we can start off by showing the name, relationship, and sex. These are seem like 3 really fundamental items about a family member. So let's try to make a table with name, relationship, and sex. And I'm just going to copy off of this example, and then we'll polish it up slowly as we go. So it looks like here they are importing these modules from tanstack/React table. So let's do that in our test screen. And this will maybe tell us if we've installed it correctly. All right, no issues yet. Next thing that they've done is defined a type called person, and then they're going to generate some default data with that person. So this is kind of similar to what we're doing, actually. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Here they're defining the columns, and it looks like for each column, so first name, they specify how to render the cell, how to render the footer. Some of these are different. Some of these have a header. So in this case, for last name, we can actually say how we want the header to look and how we want the footer to look. So I'm going to actually copy this. Well, actually, before I do this, I'm going to create a new component. And by the way, I'm doing everything in this test screen page. That's just out of convenience. It's quicker to use one file for me, especially now that since I've got a camera over here and I'm doing this live coding stuff. But eventually we will migrate things to the components folder or the screens folder or wherever is appropriate for them. But I'm going to be doing a lot of the development within the test screen, which isn't how you want your app to be finalized and maybe even not how you want to do it during development, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say family member history table is a component that I'm going to create. And for now, it's going to return a div that says family member history table. And I'm going to render that directly beneath the patient's header, just to make sure that it renders correctly. So family member history table. And there we go. Okay, so now we can start building the table, the actual table, out into this component. So the first thing I think I'd like to start with is defining the columns that I want in my table. I'm going to copy this example here. And the columns take a template of type person, which was the type defined here. For us, we don't want to use the actual family member history type. I think we want to create our own miniature type only for the table. So we said it was going to have a name, a relationship, and a sex. So let's do that. Let's make a type called family member history row. And you put an equal sign there. And we'll have a name, which is a string, a relationship, which is actually not a string, but I'm going to keep it as a string for now. And we'll say sex as a string, which is also not a string. We can check the types over here in the FHIR documentation. We see that relationship and sex are both codable concepts. So for simplicity, I'm going to keep them as strings, but I might switch them over to a codable concept momentarily. Let's see how the building of the table goes first. Okay, so now our columns are going to be of type family member history row. And I believe the accessor name is supposed to be the same as the actual property name. So here we'll have name. I don't know what an accessor function is, but let's just keep it simple and make accessor key is going to be relationship for this one. I don't know if we need an ID or not. And then for this one is going to be sex. Okay, we don't need any others yet, but we'll probably add some more columns eventually. Okay, so for the header, we'll make it kind of a nice looking header relationship, and then this one should have header of name. Actually, this needs to be a function that returns the string name. Okay. And I kind of like the idea of having a span here. Just, well, I'll just try to remember that this can actually be a JSX element if we want it to be. Alrighty, so we have got our header, cell, and footer. Header, cell, and footer. This one does not have a cell property. So I'm not sure what type info is. This is an object with table, column, row, cell, get value, and render value. Interesting. So I guess we just want to call info.getValue. By the way, you should read the documentation if you're going to use a library like this, but I'm on a 1 hour time limit, so I don't have time for that. Okay, so I've got the columns now, and now we need to figure out how to add those to the table. So here's the app that they're rendering here. They're initializing a table like this, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy it. So calling useReact table, giving it some data. There's our columns and this get core row model, which we imported. And I'm not sure where data is coming from, but I assume that's an array of these type of rows. So let's see how the data gets passed in. Here they have it as actually a state, but I think I want data to be passed into my table component. So I'm going to make an interface, and I'm going to call it I family member history table props. with a property of data. That is going to be an array of family member history rows. And I don't really like using type personally, so I'm going to change it to an interface and see if I'm allowed to do that. So I'll add that outside here. Okay, seems like everyone's okay with that, so that's good. And then I will pass in my props, which is of type I, family member history, table props. And then I could say const data equals props. All right, so now I have my data, my columns, and this get core row model. Not quite sure what that does, but maybe we'll find out soon. And then here is the markup for the table. I do know with this React table library, you're responsible for your own markup, but I'm actually just going to copy what they have and see how it looks. Alrighty. So are there any errors? It does look a bit jumbled, but I've used this library, I think, previous versions in the past, and that's how it looked. Let's see, let me save it. And okay, we actually have an error, and it's probably because we didn't pass in our data. So now it's time to generate the data. So let me think how we can generate our data. Now remember, we have loaded our family member history. So I think we'd want to save the family member history into a state. So let's create a new state called family member history, and we'll have set family member history equals, and I do have GitHub Copilot, which is helping me out quite a bit with the autocomplete. Sometimes, in this case, it didn't help at all. I want the type to be a resources.familymember history array, and the starting value will be an empty array. Alrighty. Now, before we render our table in our page, let's make a variable called table data. And what we'll do here is we'll take family member history, and we will map this. Hang on, let me just get the boilerplate stuff out of the way. Okay, we're going to map each item of a family member history to an array of family member history row objects, because that's what we need for the data to pass into here. So we'll just say data equals table data. Now it should be an empty array. Oh, I probably should specify the type. So that was family member history row array. Oh. Okay, I guess, well, that's interesting that it's recommending that. It's not what I want. Okay, so we just need basically these three properties: name, relationship, and sex. And since they're all strings, I'm just going to hard code some stuff in. For now, I'll use my own name, and sex is male. Okay, so for all three of those, we've got hard coded in these values. I'm going to switch out the values in a second. I just want to, I don't like the error screen. Okay, so interestingly, we have nothing appearing in our table. I think this is actually the footer of the table. Oh, of course. I forgot to call set family member history after we've loaded it to value. Okay, so now it's actually setting the state. Otherwise, it was just taking an empty array and mapping it to another empty array. So now when I save it, okay, there we go. So we knew that we had three family members. They were loaded down here. They each have different types of data. I actually created a father, a mother, and a sister before that, but I've hard-coded this for each row to be like this. So that's good. Okay, except that I don't like this footer here, so I'm going to delete the footer, and I think that's in the markup here in this tfoot, so this will actually have a little bit less code, looks a little bit cleaner. Alrighty. And the styling could definitely use a big improvement. I'm not great at styling stuff. So unless they have an example of a good looking table, well, maybe we can look up some styles later. This template does come with Tailwind CSS prepackaged with it out of the box. So actually, we can just do a Google search for Tailwind CSS table styles. We could save this to the end, towards the end, but it might make it more fun to code if the table looks okay. All right, how about we do table auto to auto size the columns at least. And didn't do that. Let's check something. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so that didn't exactly work. I wonder where it's getting this margin from. It's kind of hard to do this coding with the camera turned on and everything. Where's the padding? Forget. Okay, well, forget about that. Oh yeah, I remember seeing this one before. I really like this style. Oh, we should use W full. Okay, so I'm gonna just grab some styles off of here. I think it's okay to take them from this site, but I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. You should maybe design your own table. Okay, so that has actually spread out the columns nicely. Let's grab this for the T head. Oops. Okay, cool. I'm liking how it looks so far, and then let's see about the rows themselves. Alright, let me think here. So this is looping. Class name for this row is like that. Okay, cool. That's actually the header. Oh, is that for the header? Well, we can do the same thing up here for this row. Great. Okay. And then did they alternate? Actually, well, it doesn't look quite as good as the one over here, but maybe actually if I surround it with this div, it might help it a little bit. Oops. Alrighty, anyway, it looks better than it did before, so I think that's good enough for now. So let's go ahead and actually fill in the cells with the real values there. So that's going to present us some interesting challenge, I suppose, because relationship and sex in the family history instance are not strings. The name is a string, so we can just display whatever is in that instance, but for relationship and sex, we need to figure out something else. But fortunately, the Plasma framework can help us quite a bit with that. Alrighty, so up here we're going to take the FAMHX instance. We're doing a map, so we're looping through each one, and we'll just take the name. The name can be undefined, so if it is, we'll just use a blank string. For the relationship, we can actually use the Plasma FHIR React components and just use the codable concept view if we want. So we can take FHIR r4.codable concept view, and we'll say codable concept equals famhx.relationship. Alrighty, and we have an error now, and it's saying that type of name string and relationship element is not assignable to type name string relationship JSX.element. So maybe we need to change the type down here to be JSX.element. Okay, that worked. And here we see that now it's actually able to render natural sister, natural mother, natural father. Just for comparison, if we didn't have this React component, what would it actually look like? So if I were to take this out and just render famhx.relationship, well, that's not going to work. I mean, I would have to change the type now to codable concept, which is what it is. Oh, sorry, resources.codable concept. Okay. And it just straight up doesn't work. I don't even know what it's going on. It's probably saying you can't render an object or something like that. Okay, so that would not work, of course. Let me switch back to what we had. And then if you did want to render it yourself, you'd have to do something like famhx.relationship.text, which may not be there. It might be in the coding, and then if you went to coding, then you might have to, well, you'd have to check all these things for null. Let's see. And then when you get here, well, I'm not quite sure what it would be at that point, but the point is this codable concept view comes in handy quite a bit if you just want to display a codable concept really quickly and you don't have to parse through all that stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing for the sex, and in this case the value will be famhx.sex. And I need to change this from a string to a JSX.element. All right. And actually, I thought that they had a sex. It's not showing, so I'm going to take a look here. And actually, they do not have a sex for some reason. Interesting. Okay, I thought I gave them a sex when I created them a few minutes ago, but maybe I did it wrong or something. All right, so we'll do a quick cleanup here. I don't want to have the footer in my column definitions because I don't want a footer. And okay, that's it. Then we create our table, render it. Okay, this looks good so far. I don't usually like how natural sister and some of the codable concept stuff is not capitalized, so we can fix that in our CSS very quickly by determining which class this is in. And I'm going to give the family member history table class in a top level class. So I'll just call it family member history table. And then we will inspect this and see that it's coding view container. So I'm going to come into my CSS and I'm going to say family member history table, and then within that, if I have a coding view container, I will apply the capitalize class name from Tailwind CSS onto there. And now the relationships are capitalized and it looks better in my opinion. Alrighty. I would really like to have some padding on this table. Don't know exactly how to do that unless you're supposed to do it on each cell. Let me just try P2 or something. Okay, I guess that's what we do. And then I will also add it to the header cells. So P-2, this is Tailwind class for padding. Yeah, this looks a little bit better. And now I want to add a delete button so that I can delete these relatives. That's the next operation that I want to do out of our CRUD goals. And I'm at 35 minutes now, so I have 25 minutes left to build out this application. So since we want a delete button, I think what we need to do is add that to a row, because now each row is, is going to have a delete button. So I'll say delete button. This is definitely going to be a JSX.element. All right. And in our table component, we probably want to be notified when someone clicks delete. So let's say on delete click is going to be a function that returns void. And we need to know which of the family members was being deleted. So I think we could either pass in the index of the table or the family member resource itself, which would be a lot more useful. So hopefully that's possible, but let's write it out now, hoping that it is. So we're going to get the family member. Actually, let's call them the relative, which is a resources.family member history. All right, so when delete is clicked, it's going to notify us that delete was clicked. And oh, actually, hang on. So maybe we didn't need to do that. We do need to define the delete property here, and that's going to be a button called delete. I'm gonna actually comment this out for now because I may have been wrong about needing that. Okay, this is giving us an error. It's saying that delete is an element. It's not assignable to type. Oh, sorry, it was delete button. Okay, delete button. All right, let's just see that we have a button here in our table. Oh, we don't, and that's probably because we also need to update the columns thing here. Okay, so this will be called delete button. I'm not going to give it any header, and then we'll call get value, I suppose. All right, there we go. And it doesn't look like a button, so what I'm going to do is, once again, just Google search Tailwind CSS button styles and find a good-looking button. Here's a nice blue one. It's got all these classes here, and I actually would like it to be a red button, so I'll make a slight adjustment to it. Right, the button is defined right here, class name equals this, and instead of blue it's going to be red because it's deleting. Great, so now we have a delete button, and it doesn't do anything when we click it because we haven't given it an on-click event yet. So let's go ahead and import use callback from React, and we will make a callback for the delete button. So on delete relative click equals use callback. And that is hopefully going to give us a relative, which is a resources.family member history. And we need to say to do delete the relative. And I'm trying to think, what else should we do? So once we've deleted the relative, we can remove them from our family member history state so that our table will update and reflect that relative being gone appropriately. Or we could just totally reload the resources, which isn't the best way of doing it, but that's how I actually want to do it for this demo, because that way we're always in sync with the server. So I'm going to go ahead and make another function here called load fam history, and this is going to be an async function that just does the same thing that we did here. It's going to call read family member history. And it will set the state. And we need the patient ID, so that's going to be const patient ID equals patient data.id, or a blank string. And you know what, I'll actually just use callback here. So I can specify that I want Plasma and patient data as my dependencies. Oh, it's telling us it's undefined. That's what the error was. Well, anyway. So we'll say if there's no patient data yet, we're going to return. And if there's no patient data.id, we're going to return, because we don't want to try loading from a patient with no ID. And if we haven't initialized the Plasma API yet either, we'll also return, since we wouldn't be able to call the read family history method. Okay, so now we are going to load family history, save it into our state, and then we can just update that right here. Load family history. Don't need the patient ID anymore here. Okay, just save and refresh, make sure it's still working. So now what I'd like to do is dang it. Oh, load fam history. What's the problem? I haven't defined it. Okay, well now it's no longer loading, which is annoying. Just clear this, refresh. It's loading a ton of times now. Actually, I shouldn't have done this. Console.log loading family history. And can't use, this is not asynchronous. Not quite sure why it's not loading the family history. And I am calling it right here. Unless it's exiting too early. Loading family history. What is patient data in Plasma? Equal to. Undefined and undefined. Interesting. Okay. Strange. Because I need to do this. Wow. There's something strange going on with the dependencies, causing it to call this over and over. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to go ahead and put this back down here for now. I'll figure out how to deal with that later. This should be patient data can be undefined, so we can say patient data.id, or blank string, or nothing. Okay. Now it's not loading again. Oh, I got an error. Internal server error. 500. Oh, I know what the issue is, I think. Can't use that for the, oops. FHIR client.patient.read. Okay, I shouldn't be using that for the patient ID because it may not have loaded yet. I should use it from here. Yeah. Okay, sorry about all the issues there. That was a kind of a waste of time figuring that out. Anyway, sometimes that happens. Okay, so I've loaded the data again. I want to actually implement the delete method now. So over here in the delete button, we're going to add an on-delete or an on-click event. So we'll just say, let's see, on-click equals, can't remember what I called my function, on-delete relative click. And then before I actually do it, I'm going to say delete clicked, and I'm going to print out the relative. And here we will pass the relative in, which is coming from our map function. And the important thing here, really for the delete, all you need is the ID, but the Plasma FHIR, you can pass in the resource, or you can actually call, if you prefer, you can call plasma.delete resource by ID, and you could say relative.id, and that will also delete the resource. Okay, but we're not going to delete it yet. We're going to do an experiment and make sure that all the data is getting passed to the delete function properly. So there we go, delete clicked, and we get this person, Jill Smith, who is the sister, hopefully, let's see here, natural sister, yep. Okay, so we would be able to delete the relative. I don't want to delete them yet because I want to continue looking at them as I'm doing development. Okay, so remember this was a CRUD app, create, read, update, and delete. So we've got the read, we can sort of have the delete, although I didn't do it yet. Let's make a create function, and let's have that create a test family for us, like I had mentioned earlier, and then we can delete all the relatives and create them back again. So let's create a quick function called create test family. Okay, this will be an async function. And we need to initialize a family member. So I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier. I'm going to create a father, a mother, and a sister. So I'm going to say father is a resources.family member history, and it's going to be hang on. Okay, it's going to be a new resources.family member history, and this is a constructor method that's purely a convenience method provided by the Plasma framework. You don't need to use a constructor. You can actually just generate a JSON object if you want, but the constructor helps us to make sure we're passing in all of the required values. Like remember when we looked at the reference over here, relationship is required because the cardinality is 1 to 1. So we must have a relationship before we can create a family member history, a valid family member history instance. Okay, so it's asking for the patient ID. So we can say patient ID equals patient data.id. And if we don't have patient data yet, we're going to return because we don't want to create something in that case. Alrighty, so we have patient ID. We also should check if not patient ID data.id, we will return. Okay. So the constructor requires a patient ID and ID, which is actually a mistake that I've deleted in a newer version of the API, and then it requires a relationship, and it actually gives us all the keys that we can use, and we can use some autocomplete here to find out, like if we want father, what are our options here. So I happen to know that it's a natural father, so that's what I'm going to type in. But you can use the autocomplete, and it's completely type safe in this case. Okay, we wanted to add some additional properties to the father. So let's go over here and give the father a name. Since we're displaying the name, we've already specified the relationship. We'll try to add a sex as well. So let's say father.name equals John Smith. Father.sex equals, now this is a codable concept, and if we review the documentation here, it's actually an administrative gender type, which is, it's specified here in the documentation, administrative gender, male, female, other, or unknown. So we can actually get that from the framework using resources.administrativegender.male in this case. And let's also give him an age. So we'll say age. Now age has multiple data types that it can take. It can be an age, a range, or a string. So let's make for the father an actual age, and we can once again use the helper methods from the framework, the Plasma framework. So we'll say resources.age.fromYears, and we'll make the father 65 years old. All right, and there we have, and it should be age. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste this for the mother. Okay. So now we're going to name this the mother, and she's going to be a natural mother. And her name is Jane Smith. She is a female, and instead of giving her an age, let's actually, I'm actually not sure if we can have a deceased Boolean and a deceased age. So let's try to give her both. Let's say that the mother is deceased, and let's say that she had a deceased age of 57. Okay, so for the mother, we're going to say mother.deceased Boolean equals true. And by the way, when you use the framework, it's completely type safe. So if I were to spell this wrong, I would get a type error. So that's another advantage of using this framework. And we want to say mother.deceased, what was it? Deceased age is actually an age data type, so we can do the same thing we did for the father, and that is resources.age.fromYears, and we said she died at age 57. Okay. Lastly, we will create a sister, and the type here is natural sister, but once again, if you didn't know, you can, I don't know how to do the autocomplete on Mac. I keep doing that by mistake, which I don't want to do. Okay, here we go. Natural, actually that's not the complete. Okay, I'm not sure how to do the autocomplete on Mac, but it should be in there. And, oops. Actually, yeah, they're all in here. It's known, I just don't know how to pull it up right now. Okay, the sister's name was Jill Smith, and then we wanted to give this, I wanted to give the sister actually an age range. So we can say age, and here we have age range. We can say resources dot range dot from age string. And if you aren't sure how to use that, once again, consult the documentation on plasmafhir.com. Let's check for range. They have a from age string, and it looks like we can pass in like 25-30 or 20s. This is pretty cool, so I'm going to type in 20s. So I'll say that the sister is in her 20s. Okay, so now we have created 3 resource instances, but now we actually need to create them on the FHIR server. So I'm going to call plasma.createResource, although there might actually be, let's see. Oh, it's okay. So create resource, and it's going to be type resources.familyMemberHistory. Oops, what just happened there? And then we need to pass in the resource that we want to create, which in this case is the father. This returns a promise, so we could actually say then, and it will return the created instance. So I'll say relative, which is a resources.familyMemberHistory. And why don't we just say console.log family member created, and we will display that family member that got created. This is warning us that Plasma can possibly be null or undefined, I think. So we'll just say if Plasma hasn't been initialized, then don't do this function. Okay, so now we're going to create the father, the mother, and the sister. Now we have a function for creating a test family, so whenever we launch this app, like I said, I think this data might get refreshed nightly or something like that. So now whenever we launch the app, I have a function to create a test family. And let's add a quick button on here to, when we press it, we can create a new test family. So I'm going to look for my delete button because I liked the styles on that. And I'll say right below the table, I'm going to make actually a green button called Create Test Family. And this is going to say when we click it, we're just going to call Create Test Family. All right, and maybe I'll add a little bit of padding here. I'm a little bit behind. It's at 57 minutes right now, so I might go a little bit over an hour. Okay, there's going to be some mistakes here actually, because when I click Create Test Family, it will create on the server, hopefully if it works, but the internal React state doesn't know those relatives got created yet, so we would want to do a reload or add those to the state manually. I'm still not sure which one I want to do. Well, I would prefer to just reload it directly. So I can try to do that, but it didn't work last time, so I'll just put it in here. Let me say, where was the load test family, or create test family? And then we can call load fam history. Let's see if that actually loads it. I don't think it will. But anyway, let's click create test family. Now we see family member created, family member created, family member created. Okay, so that worked. It didn't reload, unfortunately. Oh, because the promises. Dang. Okay, I think I should have done await. Well, I've already created them though, so now we should have 6 family members. There we go. So 3 of them are new, 3 of them were from before. Now we can actually implement our delete method so that we can start deleting these since we don't need them anymore. So I'm going to say if Plasma was not created, I will return. Otherwise, I'm going to call plasma.delete resource, and I want to delete a family member history resource type. And I'm going to pass in that relative, and let's see if it requires any other. No, okay. And then when that's finished, I'll just say family member was deleted, and there's the relative. Okay. So I will refresh. I got 6 people. I'm going to delete both of the Jills, and I should have a confirmation dialog on the delete. I just clicked and it didn't say anything, and it didn't disappear, of course. So I can't even be sure if it deleted or not, and it should have actually printed on the console. I'm tapping it, I'm trying to click it. Let me refresh and see if Jill is gone. No, she's not gone. Okay. Not sure what's going on here. Deleting relative. Maybe it's not actually calling the function. Oh, okay. I think I needed to do a refresh. So now it's showing up down here at the bottom. Family member was deleted. And then that family member is deleted too. Okay, now I'll refresh. We have now we have some blank rows. That's interesting. Okay, so this is something that I think we'll need to figure something out for, which is I believe what's happened is that the read is still returning maybe even some cached results for Jill. It's probably this one right here. Let's check it. So it's returning back this object with this ID, but it no longer exists on the server because it was deleted. But for some reason, the read is still returning that to us. Probably after we refresh it a few times, maybe wait a little bit of time. Oh, there we go. It went away. Okay, so there may be some caching issues. So if you're building an app and you're doing what I was trying to do, which was reload every time, you may have some weird behavior in between if it hasn't fully updated on the server yet. Okay, well, it has been an hour, and I didn't complete the goal of performing all the CRUD operations, although we did do C, R, and D. The one thing we didn't do was update a family member, and I'll show you how you can do that, but, well, actually, I'll go ahead and implement it in a silly way. Let's create another button here, and let's make this a slate colored button. And this is going to be called Update Family Member. Okay. And when we click it, we're going to call Update Family Member. And this is purely for demonstration purposes. I'm going to delete it as soon as I stop the video. I'm going to make a function here called Update Family Member. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, if Plasma was not initialized, return. If the family member history dot length is less than or equal to 0, return, which is just checking do we have at least one family member. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the first family member's name to something else and then update it. And then that way we can see how an update operation would be performed. So I'll say relative equals family member history 0. Relative.name equals, let's just give it the current time. So his name is now whatever the time is in milliseconds or whatever it is. Okay, and then we'll call plasma.update resource. This is a resources.family member history, and it just takes the resource itself. So we will pass in relative, and then we'll say, and it does also return the relative back to you. So get this working. Okay, and we'll just say console.log family member was updated and show that family member. Okay, and once again, it's not doing the refresh. There's kind of 2 steps now. We need to do something on the FHIR server, and then we need to do something in the React state to update it. So what I would really should be doing is something like set family member history, and then setting, you know, I don't know the syntax off the top of my head, but setting the state back to itself, except modifying this relative to have his new name updated. But since that is not happening, what we need to do instead is refresh, and then I'm going to click Update Family Member, and we should see once this promise completes, family member updated. Okay, so he has been updated. Whatever the first family member was, John Smith. So now when I refresh the page, I should see his name has changed to something else. Okay, it changed to the current time, which is this number 7132. I can click it again and he'll be updated to the more recent time stamp. Different number. Okay, so that's how you would perform an update operation. I think, I'm not sure if I'll make a second follow-up video for this or not, or maybe I'll just do it by myself. But I would like to have maybe have these fields be editable or something, so then you can edit the person's name, press enter, and it'll update for you. Or there might be a save button at the end where we can make all these changes locally, and then when we're finished, we'll click save, and all those changes will be sent to the FHIR server all at once. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I hope it was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or contact me. You can use the contact page on the plasmafhir.com website. And if you like the content, then go ahead and subscribe to be notified of future videos. And once again, thanks for watching, and have a great day.